This is for the assignment due April 6th, 10.2, 41 through 66, 10.3, 31 through 46, and then skipping to 61 through 68, 10.4, 1 through 6, and 10.5, 9, and 10, 13, and 14, and then 10.6, 1 through 6. I jumped to other sections and just nibble on them a little bit so that we can learn them slowly and come back and practice every lesson we do. First, 10.2, 41 through 66, using our fractional exponents. I've got the odd down here, so if you don't have a book, the answers are there also. 41, a to the 2/3 times a to the 5/3 equals a to the 7/3. Then 42, b to the 9/5 times b to the 3/5, 8/5. You add those two exponents, 9/5 and 8/5, so you get b to the 17/5. You add exponents when you're multiplying. 43, same thing, x to the negative 2/5 times x to the 7/5 comes out to x. 44, y to the 4/3 and y to the negative 1/3, you add those two exponents, y to the 3/3, which is y to the first, which is y. 45, 3 to the 1/4, 3 to the 3/8 is 3 to the 5/8. 46 is like it, 5 to the 1/2 times 5 to the 1/6. You've got to get a common denominator on your two exponents. 1/2 becomes 3/6. 1/6 we leave as 1/6. So we can add those exponents as 5 to the 4/6, which reduces, so 5 to the 2/3. 47, y to the 1/3 divided by y to the 1/6. Remember, you subtract exponents. Show your work. On these odd exercises, you must show your work. 48, x to the 3/4, x to the 1/8. Got to get a common denominator, x to the 6/8 and x to the 1/8. Then you can subtract. That's what you do on division, subtract exponents. X to the 5/8. Or, as a radical, that'd be the 8th root of x to the 5th. Remember that. 49, 4u squared inside the parentheses to the 3/2 power. Answer, 8u cubed. How do you do that? 50 shows us there. 32 to the 1/5, x to the 2/3, and the whole quantity cubed. That 3 is going to be times the 1/5 and times the 2/3. 3 times 1/5 is 3/5. 3 times 2/3 is 6/3. Then 32 to the 3/5 means the 5th root of 32 cubed. And then x to the 6/3 is x squared. So the 5th root of 32 is 2, and then you cube that 2, you get 8, so 8x squared. Then 51, b to the 1/2, b to the 3/4 over negative b to the 1/4. Answer, negative b. How you do that? A to the 1/4, a to the negative 1/2 over a to the 2/3. All of those are a's. So we put an a, we add the 1/4 with the negative 1/2 because you're multiplying there. So you add those two exponents, and then you subtract the 2/3 because you're dividing. So those three exponents, you need a common denominator. 1/4, 3/12. 1/2, negative 6/12. Negative 2/3, negative 8/12. Then I add all the exponents. Comes up to negative 11/12. I make that a positive exponent by moving it to the denominator, or I can write it as a radical, 12th root of a to the 11th. 53, x cubed to the 1/2 over x to the 7/2. The answer, 1 over x squared. Show your work always. That's going to be very important. Y to the 11/3 over y to the 5th, quantity to the 1/3. First, we get rid of this parentheses by multiplying 1/3 times 5. That is 5/3. So y to the 11/3 over y to the 5/3. Then, because you're dividing, you subtract exponents. 11/3 minus 5/3 is 6/3. So that's 2. So y squared. 55. We have 3x to the 1/4 in the parentheses to the power of 3 over x to the 1/12. Answer, 27x to the 2/3. 56, 2x to the 1/5, quantity to the 4th. So I get rid of that 4 by taking it times the exponents of both 2 and x. So 2's exponent was 1, understood to be there. So 2 to the 4th, then 4 times 1/5, 4/5, over the x to the 3/10 that was on the bottom. Then 2 to the 4th is 16. And so now the other two things were x's. So I subtract their exponents because we're dividing 4/5 minus 3/10. I've got to get a common denominator. And so I get 5/10 when I've got that common denominator, which is 1/2 16x to the 1/2 as a fractional exponent, or 16 square root of x. 57, y cubed z to the 1/6 over y to the negative 1/2 z to the 1/3. Answer, y over z to the 1/6. 58, we have m squared n inside parentheses to the 1/4, so I take that 1/4 times both exponents. 2 times 1/4, 2/4. 1/4 times 1, 1/4. Over the denominator there, m to the negative 1/2, n to the 5/8. So my m's I'm dividing, so I subtract 2/4, which is 1/2, minus the negative 1/2 on the bottom. The n's, I subtract the exponents, 1/4, which is 2/8, minus the 5/8 on the bottom. So 1/2 minus a minus 1/2 is 1/2 plus 1/2, 2/2. 2/8 minus 5/8 is negative 3/8. So I get m to the first. Then I get rid of this negative exponent by moving it to the denominator. So m over n to the 3/8, or m over the 8th root of n cubed. 59, shown here with our answer. 60, a to the negative 2nd, b cubed to the 1/8. I take that 1/8 times the negative 2 is negative 2/8. 1/8 times 3, 3/8. In the denominator, I have a to the negative 3, b to the negative 1/4. So negative 1/4 times negative 3 is 3/4. Negative 1/4 times the 1 on the b is negative 1/4. Then I have a's on top and bottom, so I subtract exponents, negative 2/8 minus 3/4. B's on top and bottom, so I take 3/8 minus negative 1/4. Then I have to get a common denominator. The a's, it's 8's. Negative 2/8 minus 6/8 is negative 8/8, which is negative 1. The b's, it's also 8's. 3/8 plus 2/8 makes 5/8, and 5/8 here. Then on a to the negative 1st, you move it down to get rid of the negative exponent, and b to the 5/8, or that b to the 5/8 is the 8th root of b to the 5th. 61, we will use the distributive property. Y to the 1/2 times this quantity equals y minus y to the 7/8. 62 is like that, x to the 1/2 times x to the 1/2 plus x to the 3/2. So the x to the 1/2 out in front is times the x to the 1/2 here. The x to the 1/2 out front is times the x to the 3/2. So x times x here, add exponents, 2/2. X times x here, add 1/2 and 3/2 is 4/2. Then reduce x to the 1st plus x squared. 63, same way. we use a distributive property. And here's our answer. X to the 2/3 times x minus 2 comes out to x to the 5/3 minus 2x to the 2/3. 64. 3x to the 1/2 times x plus y. So 3x to the 1/2 times the x first. Then 3x to the 1/2 times the y. So 3x to the 1/2 times x, well, that means x to the first, which is 2 over 2 to give us a common denominator. So then we get 3/2 there. 1/2 plus 2/2. 3/2. 3x to the 3/2. The other two, the other side, the other term, there's x and y, so nothing we can do there. We just leave them in that way. Then, as a radical, 3/2 means the square root of x cubed. X to the 1/2 means square root of x. Y is not in a radical, so 3y square root of x. Then 65 and 66 use FOIL. First times first, outside times outside, inside times inside, last times last. 65, 2x to the 1/3 plus 3 times 2x to the 1/3 minus 3 gives you an answer of 4x to the 2/3 minus 9, because the middle two terms cancel out. 66, as shown here, we take y to the 1/2 times y to the 1/2. First times first. We take y to the 1/2 times 5. 5y to the 1/2. We take 5 times y to the 1/2. 5y to the 1/2. We take 5 times 5. 25. FOIL, in other words. Then the first term, y to the 1/2 and y to the 1/2. Y times y means add exponents, 2/2, which is y to the first. Add the two terms in the middle, because both of them have the same variable, y to the 1/2. So 5 plus 5 is 10, y to the 1/2 plus 25. Then y to the 2/2 becomes y, 10y to the 1/2 plus 25. Or writing this middle one as a radical. Okay, that concludes the first section of this assignment.